Palestinian encampment at UCLA. We kind of see them tossing things aside. We see them moving different kinds of things. We see them with their helmets on. And those protesters, even as things are being removed around them and it's some sort of weapons being pointed against them, they've got their arms linked. They're huddled really tightly together, kind of just refusing to move. I haven't seen any officers fight or physically touch necessarily some of those protesters in the encampment, but we have seen people being detained, people in zip ties. So it's unclear how many people are still left standing at that initial encampment. So it looks like maybe Logan is back up for us now. Logan, it's just been a couple of minutes. Have things changed dramatically now, or what are you seeing?
Yeah, Parker, what we're seeing are a number of protesters being marched out of this encampment with their hands zip tied behind their backs and the ground just being littered with the shells of these flashbangs that have been fired off by law enforcement officers here. You can take a look behind me and see holding the ground, preparing to potentially enter into the encampment. We're going to pan over and show you what the encampment looks like at this point, as nearly half of the wooden barricades that were at one point separating this encampment from the rest of the campus have been torn down. And this is where they are starting to walk people out from this encampment. At least from our perspective, we have seen nearly a dozen protesters inside this encampment be marched out with their hands zip tied behind their backs. And the Daily Bruin is even reporting that at least one professor has been detained by enforcement officers here. Very active and ongoing scene. So far the protesters that we have seen coming out of here, the detainees, have been largely young people. It is definitely a very loud and chaotic scene as you hear another flashbang there. This is, every couple of seconds here that we are hearing these loud bangs, and you can see a group of protesters being detained here, walked along. We're showing you right there that's a number of people being walked out. It's just in these small groups of people. So this is looks like 3 or 4 protesters here that are being marched out. And this is what's been happening over the course of the last several minutes. These numbers just continuing to stack up in terms of how many people are being detained by law enforcement. So they are slowly but surely working their way through this encampment to clear it out to the best of their ability. You see this riot squad here marching and moving, working together definitely. We don't know where they are moving yet, but again, this is part of a very, very active and ongoing situation. We can tell you that within the encampment, we've seen tents collapse and go back up. It is clear that members of the encampment are trying to keep those tents standing. It looks like they are trying to keep tents that are being used as medic stations identifiable to those inside of the encampment. We know from our reporting on the ground and from sources that we have within the encampment that there are a couple of different medic tents that they have set up within the encampment to treat people who are being pepper sprayed. They don't have the ability to treat people who are severely injured. However, they have been in contact with Ronald Reagan Medical Center, and we know that the ambulance is on scene. We're going to show you here. This is another riot squad working to enter into the barricaded areas. Actively marching into the encampment, or towards the encampment, I should say. And again, Parker, there were wooden barricades separating this encampment from the entirety of the campus, and we have just seen one by one those planks of wood come down. Last time we checked in, it was about 1/8 of the barricade that had been taken down. It now looks like it is at least half of it, potentially even more than half of it, and the number of law enforcement officers in the area is not dropping by any means. It is only continuing to go up.
Logan, so from where you are, you have seen some of those people being escorted away by officers, and you talked about maybe there is a need to treat people who are injured. What's the state of those people who are being taken away? Have you seen any injuries? Can you talk to that at all?
So, Parker, the people that we have seen marched out of this encampment, at least from this side, seemingly have not been injured. I can't confirm that. We haven't been able to shout out at them. However, they have been able to walk out seemingly on their own volition, definitely taking those steps by themselves. They aren't being carried. They aren't limping by any means. And so they seem to be fine, at least from our perspective. It doesn't seem like these people are injured in there. However, there are a number of ambulances on standby here in case things do take a turn for the worse. That doesn't seem to be the case yet. We are seeing that large riot squad that was just right behind me moments ago moving very, very quickly towards the encampment, and they are continuing to tear down planks of wood here from this encampment, separating it, barricading it off from the rest of the campus. It is just a matter of time, Parker, before they're able to take down the rest of this barricade and work their way further and further into the encampment. This was an area that had tops of tents that we could see from far back, and now we are seeing a number of those tents that have been torn down, Parker. It is just a very active and ongoing scene, but clearly law enforcement is working their way through this encampment.
Logan, can you give us any kind of point in time check on that original encampment? Because we're watching as they tear down, or at least try to tear down, some of the wooden barriers and some of those metal barriers and remove some of those tents. Is half of it gone? Is a quarter of it gone? How much work is left ahead of them? Or maybe it's too hard to tell from where you are?
Well, you can kind of see it in the shot that we're showing. It is a little bit far away, but it is now definitely a little bit more than half of the wooden barricades that are gone. And they are continuing to remove those at a very fast pace. This has happened in a matter of minutes since the last time we checked in. It's maybe 10 minutes, Parker, since they have been taking down about now it's at least 3/4 of this barricade that's being taken down, and it's happening quickly. That entire group of law enforcement officers that was just behind me moments ago, they are all actively working to take down these barricades. You can see not only these barricades falling, but as soon as they get those planks of wood down, they are also working to take down those tents. We can also hear the protesters chanting. They are definitely trying to the best of their ability to hold the line. You are now hearing a large number of flashbangs going off. This is at a rate much faster than what we have seen before, Parker, that is getting much louder and louder out here. It sounds like a fireworks show. You can hear it. That is right inside the encampment. So this is again, trying to startle, to let people know that this is a very serious, active, and ongoing situation. Now nearly all of those planks of wood separating the encampment from the rest of the campus have been taken down. It was a very swift and quick operation from law enforcement to do that. Again, just a number of minutes that they were able to do this. And that is, again, just because of the sheer number of officers that are out here, something that we have seen grow significantly throughout the course of this evening and into the early morning.
Logan, you've been talking about it, and we've seen it.
I just want to let you hear that, Parker.
Yes, we not only do we hear it, we can see the flashes as well go off, and it's been going like that since we came on the air. And we saw from your shot those officers head right toward the encampment. Are any of the protesters starting to leave? Can you talk about the balance? Because you talk about how all of these officers, it seems like they're getting reinforcements. And to kind of recap, earlier in the night, we did see them try to breach the encampment, and then we saw them pull back, and now we're seeing this. Really, it looks like a full force effort to really get it cleared. Can you talk about the balance? Are there now more okay, so yeah, explosions even going off in midair. We just saw that. Can you talk about maybe the balance? Are there more officers now than there are protesters? Are people starting to leave?
Yeah, Parker, I can tell you that at least from our perspective, it definitely looks like the number of officers outnumbers the amount of protesters that are inside this encampment. We can estimate that there were about 200 to 300 people camped out inside of this encampment. That's just an estimate. There are many, many more law enforcement members here than the number of protesters. But again, Parker, if you are in this encampment as a protester, there's no way out at this point. They are going to work their way through it and detain as many people as possible before they let people go. At this point, nobody has tried to exit, and that's been the state of affairs throughout the entire course of the evening and into the early morning. The people that are in there seemingly want to stay and want to hold their ground. And again, they're surrounded at this point, Parker. You can see barricades have been torn down, and there is a line of law enforcement officers in full riot gear holding that line of the barricade. Again, if they wanted to leave, I can't imagine that they could get past all of these officers, even if they tried to run through them. It is a very
the only
large
people
number.
who are leaving are those who are leaving by escort, who are zip-tied, who are being taken by an officer walk off of campus. So you're right. I mean, they're completely surrounded now by those officers there on the campus of UCLA. This is that pro-Palestinian encampment that really, it was established about a week ago, this coming to a head now tonight, or early this morning, rather. So again, we saw officers try to breached this encampment earlier. They pulled back. Now they've really taken this full force effort. If I just kind of listen to the sounds coming in from your camera, I mean, those flashbangs, yes, we hear that. Are people still chanting? Are they yelling? Or maybe it's starting, is it starting to turn? Is it starting to calm?
Parker, I can still hear protesters from within the encampment yelling. I can still hear people saying we're not leaving is what it sounds like they're saying from the inside. Again, there's definitely a number of people still in there, seemingly still passionate about trying to hold their ground. We are also hearing law enforcement yell out a number of requests. I can't make out exactly what it is that they are saying. Are coordinating amongst one another where they're moving, and so that is part of what you're hearing. But yes, there are still chants coming from within this encampment, folks saying that they're not leaving. It's something that we've heard all night long. You can still hear off in the distance the crowd of protesters that have been now pushed fully out of this area, Parker. You saw where Taylor was. That crowd has now moved significantly far away from the Royce Quad, and they've cleared this area out so that they can bring these people out one by one as they're detaining them. You've seen a number of people come out of this encampment, you know, with their hands zip tied, a number of arrests being made, and you just see more and more law enforcement officers in this area. It's hard to hear what these people are shouting over the sheer number of flashbangs that are being fired off. It seems like every couple of seconds we are just hearing these loud bangs. Definitely a chaotic scene here, Parker.
Logan, it's a good point you bring up. So yes, we have to watch this encampment very closely to see how this develops, but this is not the only scene on campus. Where Taylor is, we had that line of officers standing off with the protesters there. I mean, it's starting to get a little fractured here. Do you know how many scenes on campus there are of them pushing away the protesters there? At least 2 that we have eyes on.
Yeah, Parker, that's right. This is seemingly a tactic that was used over the course of the weekend when crews from various law enforcement agencies were working to separate protesters and counter-protesters on Sunday. They worked to march the crowd through the campus to get them to disperse, and that is the exact same route that they are taking right now, and it has created 2 separate scenes here. This was one active area. Just about an hour ago, it was one active area, and they have worked to clear out all of those protesters that and here supporting the encampment, chanting throughout the night in support of the pro-Palestinian encampment and seemingly separating these 2 groups from one another so that they can carry out their operation and have more ground to cover. And it's definitely made it a much easier scene for law enforcement to navigate through. They now have complete control over the quad and over the space where most of these protesters were throughout the course of the evening. And you can just see in some of the images that we're seeing here that they are just working their way through this encampment, now holding the front line, and you're just seeing a number of tents coming down. It is very, very quickly becoming a destroyed encampment. It is, you know, these barricades that have been set up over the course of the last several days, barricades that we saw members of the encampment working hard to reinforce overnight. You saw one of our reporters
All right, you've been watching live coverage from Spectrum News SoCal. We have watched as police, who many dressed in full riot gear with shields, helmets, nightsticks, have moved into the pro-Palestinian encampment, which is home to hundreds of protesters. We watched as they pulled down plywood barriers that were put up. They encountered the protesters, many of which who were very well equipped themselves. They had goggles, helmets. They were holding various items, buckets, umbrellas. Now, we are actually have our feed back up. Let's go back in and listen in to our Spectrum News SoCal station's coverage.
Of the evening and into the early morning, they've been here for a number of hours, and they were originally just separating this crowd of supporters for this encampment, the protesters that showed up here to support the pro-Palestinian encampment. So now that those protesters are gone, you can see those barricades being held up, and these officers are holding the line here just to ensure that any stragglers that are still here don't get through to the encampment, don't get through to interfere with law enforcement's operation. But yes, those barricades have been up over the the night and into the morning to keep these crowds separated.
All right, Logan, stand by. We're going to be coming back to you shortly, but let's go to Taylor, who's also on campus, just kind of coming to us from a different vantage point. Earlier when we checked in with Taylor, we saw this kind of standoff, this line. We saw officers on one side of the street, on the other. In the middle of the street, we saw those protests. Taylor, are you still where you were? What's the latest there?
Hey, Parker, no, we actually inched much closer to the heart of the encampment. So everything that Logan was describing, you're now going to see on screen. We are, I would say, about 30 to 40 yards away from that line that he was describing. It's a swarm of law enforcement officers in full riot gear, and then all of these protesters who have been in this encampment for multiple days, linking arms and trying to hold the line. Just moments ago, I think you saw it on camera, we saw law enforcement up close tearing down that man-made barricade. Plywood, they were stripping it off, tearing it down. They have made their way to the line here. I can see people on the other side, students, protesters, some of them running away, trying to, maybe the ones that didn't want to hold the line, making their way outside to the other side where the steps are here on campus. But no, you can see the line right there, a swarm of law enforcement and a sea of protesters.
Taylor, I mean, things have changed so quickly, right? This is the encampment, the pro-Palestinian encampment. There were once, minutes ago, right? There were barriers there. There was the wood, there was the metal, there are still some tents. That's all been stripped away.
Yeah. Look, Parker, we witnessed all morning these protesters rebuilding their barricades as more flashbangs are coming through. They spent hours trying to fortify their tent, and I would say in a matter of minutes, law enforcement in droves came out and tore down those barricades, and they are in the line. It is like I said, a sea of law enforcement in full riot gear. We have CHP out here, we have LAPD out here, and then of course there's also campus security out here. Right now, just to paint a picture of where I am standing on a picnic table, which I'm sure students normally on campus eat their lunch at, about 40 yards away from the heart of this encampment, looking down at what right now looks like a bit of a standoff between the students who are linked arms, holding their ground, and law enforcement.
Exactly. So what we're seeing, it doesn't look like there's any necessarily physical movement, and we've seen this happen before here and where you were earlier, this kind of standstill where they're literally facing each other, and it is a face-off. I don't know that they're going to necessarily try to push into that, but they did remove those barriers. I mean, you're not seeing any more incursion into the encampment, right? Just holding these lines for both officers and protesters.
Yeah, holding the line. Right now, there are metal barricades that were put up by the university that they were trying to clear out of the way. I think they're trying to get as much debris out of the way, so if they continue to push in, there is no obstruction in their way. That would be law enforcement. I did see a couple of stragglers kind of off to the side get arrested, get zip tied, but the main line of protesters, the ones that have been in this encampment for days, again, they are in a line right now, and it seems to be a bit of a standstill. Law enforcement has not tried to push in yet the way that they pushed in on the protesters who are on the other side of the campus where we just were. They pushed in and continued to move them down the road at a pretty rapid pace. Right here, we're still at a standstill.
All right, so we have multiple reporters there on the ground. We've got Taylor, we've got Logan. I'm watching these live pictures as they come in. Now we're going to bring in Giselle Fernandez. She's also standing by to watch this as it unfolds again. So this is the campus of UCLA. This is the pro-Palestinian encampment that was established about a week ago, and now we're really seeing a full force effort by officers, multiple law enforcement agencies to tear away some of that barricade, some of the metal, some of the wood, some of those tents. We've seen really intense face-offs between the officers on one side and the protesters there. We've seen people being taken away in zip ties, being escorted away by officers. But again, we're going to bring in Giselle Fernandez. Giselle, can you hear me?
I certainly can. Good morning, Parker. What we're seeing, if you're just joining us, is an escalation between pro-Palestinian demonstrators and now law enforcement. This is as Parker just said so eloquently, a face-off. This is a standoff between police and protesters refusing to leave after that order to disperse finally came in from the university, a university under scrutiny for how it's handled the students and the protests on campus, with the chancellor actually, or the president of the Board of Regents, Michael Drake, ordering an independent review of the university's actions and response by law enforcement, which has led to this moment. This is a moment, Parker, as we all know, the university was trying to avoid. There have been, observers and pundits and law enforcement that said the university was too lenient, trying to appease or stand by the rights of the students to have their First Amendment rights and right to assembly expressed, not interfere with that. But there are many who say they should have done more to prevent these encampments from being in place for an entire week. Deemed unlawful on Tuesday when violence broke out and escalated this crisis to a whole new level. And what we are seeing right now at 4:20 in the morning is a mass force of police in riot gear joined by multiple agencies, the sheriffs, the CHP, obviously campus police, and they're trying very hard to avoid an escalation of violence. We have seen students led out of the encampment dismantled. There was flash bombs, as you know, or whatever those things are called. Flash bangs, thank you. Flash bangs. And we're seeing students really holding the line, locking arms, trying to stave off police. This is a tradition of student protests that dates back to the civil rights movement. But, there was a point in that tradition, historical tradition, where, students protesting would stave off as long as possible, then accept the consequences of arrest and have made their point. This has escalated and transcended that. They're willing to stand that line to make their point heard. And as we know, Logan Hall, you've been out there all morning in the wee hours. But let's remind our viewers just joining us now what's led to this moment. These students protesting U.S. and Israeli response to the war in Gaza are demanding the university, and this is echoed across universities across the country, as you know, they divest all from companies that do business with Israel and manufacturing weapons that are sent to Israel. Talk to us about what's led to this moment. You've been there throughout the last few days.
Yeah, Giselle, it's definitely a culmination of the last week's worth of protests out here from this encampment. I want to show you what's happening right behind me right now, and then that is the scene that is very active and ongoing with law enforcement facing off face-to-face here with this human barricade of very passionate protesters that have been holding this encampment for the last several days, and they have locked arms. They are wearing hard hats and goggles and masks, many of them gas masks, and they are seemingly not moving. This is something that we've heard over the course of the evening and into the early morning, chanting, "We are not going anywhere," chanting peaceful protest. They are holding this line, Giselle. They are face-to-face with law enforcement officers. We've seen a number of protesters already detained. Just behind us is a circle of protesters whose hands are zip-tied, and they are sitting on the ground as riot squads gather information from them. What you're seeing right now is a look into the encampment unlike anything we've really had over the last several days, as this has largely been barricaded off and we haven't been able to look inside of it. Law enforcement very, very quickly took down these barricades today. Clearly, the sheer number of law enforcement officers and the force that they were able to use took down the amount of plywood and metal barricades that they had set up. We saw lots of tents that were scattered across the Royce Quad here fall very quickly. At first, students trying to put them back up, but now it is very clear that all of the students that are in this encampment have formed that human barricade and are working extremely hard to hold this line. They are face-to-face with law enforcement officers, and it is clear that they are just working through these protesters one by one, grabbing several of them and detaining them at a time. At the moment, Giselle, they seemingly do not appear to be moving. They do not appear to be wavering in any way. And again, Giselle, this speaks to the passion that you were talking about that these protesters have. It speaks to the cause that they say they believe so firmly in, and that is calling on this university to disclose and divest from their ties to Israel. And again, this is the culmination of nearly a week's worth of protests here, something that has been felt across the country, definitely coming to a head here on UCLA's campus. Yeah, and what we're looking at is a very, very delicate situation that law enforcement finds itself in on a university campus. You know, during finals, student protests, they have every right to express their views under the First Amendment, the right to assembly, and yet when they defy orders and by the university and cross into civil disobedience and breaking the law, this is when the university had called in law enforcement, multiple agencies. You're hearing the flashbangs. This is what they tried to avoid, but the situation we're seeing now is very tense because they don't want this to escalate any further. We're talking about students. We're also talking about staff and faculty standing in alliance with some of these students, I understand, saying that they want to be there not only to stand by their right to the First Amendment right, but also to encourage law enforcement not to arrest them, not to interfere. Have you seen any of these faculty and heard any of the from the teachers who are there, Logan? Yeah, Giselle, it's a great question. The Daily Bruin, the student newspaper here at UCLA, and I will say those student journalists have been doing an incredible job covering the sequence of events here over the course of the last several days. As you hear a number of flashbangs being fired off yet again, the Daily Bruin is reporting that at least one professor has been arrested as a part of these protests. But Giselle, from our perspective, it is hard to tell who's who, as most of these folks are now wearing hard hats and helmets and goggles and face masks and face coverings. So it's hard to determine who among them is students, who among them are simply protesters, and who among them are faculty members. But we know for a fact that there are several faculty members who are within this encampment at the moment, standing in solidarity with their students and supporting them. We know that at least one has been detained, according to the Daily Bruin's reporting. So Giselle, that is definitely a part of the situation out here. It is not only students, it's a healthy mix of a number of different groups out here protesting. But again, from what we can tell, it is mostly young people and it is mostly these students. Yeah, what we have been told is that the faculty circulated a letter to Chancellor Jean Block with about 360 signatures demanding no police action, no disciplinary action be taken from these students. And what we're seeing is a situation literally that's stunning. I mean, riot gear, police out in force on a university campus, one of the most prestigious universities in the country, with the most applications from anywhere across really the world, UCLA. And here we are, Royce Hall shut down, the library shut down, schools shut down. With this standoff underway right now, police in riot gear wearing gas masks, flashbangs, ready with their batons should anything get out of control.
The 2024 election will decide who leads our nation and the balance of power in Congress, impacting all of us. From Capitol Hill to the Oval Office, let Spectrum News be your resource for balanced, in-depth coverage with our dedicated experts in local politics. Strengthening democracy by informing your community. That's our mission. Available on all of your favorite devices, exclusively on Spectrum.
At Spectrum, our workforce of over 100,000 employees are all located right here in the U.S. You can find them in our stores, in the field, and in our call centers with 100% U.S.-based customer service. Our team works hard to provide the towns
with other student safety, with laws of the university, and now law enforcement. This is challenging really some of our strongest democratic principles, the right to do something under our Constitution when it clashes, though, with other students' rights to attend school, faculty's rights to finish their finals, hold graduation ceremonies. Talk to us about this clash we're seeing, Logan, and what you've heard from the students who say, no, I have my right, and they're going to defy these laws.
Yeah, Giselle, it's such a complex, complicated situation. And again, you really nailed it. There are a number of different ideologies clashing here. And the students believe that they do have the right to this peaceful protest. But, you know, as you can see in the background of some of these images, these are historic buildings here on UCLA's campus, covered in graffiti, vandalized, right? I mean, this campus has been impacted by these encampments over the last several days as students have struggled to get to classes, have been unable to use the library, have been unable to navigate this campus. And we have also seen lots of those agitators pop up and these violent outbreaks that have happened between protesters and counter-protesters. And again, you mentioned the law enforcement presence here on campus and how much that has escalated over the course of the evening, and the sheer amount